So, I am Christina Asbury. Welcome to the Transitional Land Training course. I am going to be your facilitator today, and I'm so glad that you can join me for what I hope you'll find to be both a fun and an informative course. Before we begin, I'll tell you a little bit about myself. I've been in ALC since 2007. It was one of the first designations that I pursued on my path in real estate. And I have served on multiple national committees, represented RLI on other committees. I've been, local chapter president before, Land Realtor of the Year a couple of times, but I enjoy land. I think it's fun. It's a really special niche. So I'm excited that you guys are in class today so that you can learn a little bit more about this niche that we call land. So before we begin, we're going to do some introductions and everybody will talk, a little bit about themselves and give, your background, why you're here, and something that you hope to learn. And we'll do some other icebreakers and things, and then we'll get right into class. So first of all, transitional land is one of the courses where in the training series offered by RLI, the Realtors Land Institute. And since this may be the first RLI course that you've attended, let me tell you a little bit about RLI. We offer an extensive series of training classes like this to help you develop skills necessary to become an awesome land real estate professional. And our goal at Realtors Land Institute is to provide skill enhancement and to all those who broker, lease, sell, develop, or manage land. So you don't necessarily have to be a realtor to be involved within the Realtors Land Institute or be involved in the land real estate industry. So we recognize that our members are very diverse. Training is one of the many benefits that RLI offers as a member. A few of the other benefits we have is networking at national and local level land conferences and chapter meetings. 67% of RLI members have conducted business with other RLI members. So that's nearly 2/3. There's a lot of business that we do within our network of land professionals across the country and in our local regions to increase our business. Members receive discounts to land view resources and courses and webinars, and you also get a discount for the National Land Conference, which is coming up in Denver in March of 2023. The National Land Conference is one event that all land professionals should really attend every year. RLI has a huge voice in DC, being the voice of RLI. Hang on a minute, I got something going on with my screen here. Stop. There we go. RLI is an advocate in Washington, DC. We are the voice of land on important issues in Congress. Members can market their properties through our exclusive listing site, the Land Connections, or you can also email them to other RLI members through our eProperties resource as well. RLI members also have the ability to apply for the Apex Awards based on your production level each year. Award winners receive national recognition through RLI, NAR, the National Association of Realtors, and our sponsor, the Land Report. Members receive biannual Terra Firma magazines, and they are filled with educational articles written by experts. I get a lot of these magazines from other councils, institutes, and societies from NAR every month, but I'll tell you, Terra Firma is definitely the one that I flip through first. Our magazines are filled with all kinds of great articles as well. Be sure to read them. You can learn a lot about what's going on with land in other parts of the country. Members are listed on our public search and find a land consultant page as well. It's a great interactive tool that's easy to identify other ALCs or people pursuing the designation in other areas of the country. You can search by city, state, zip code, distance, radius. It's a great tool and a great resource to find other land professionals. This is just a small snapshot of the benefits that are exclusive to our RLI members. And to learn more, you can visit our RLI website. Are there any questions about the course? All right, if not, then our accredited land consultants are really more than land professionals. We're the most accomplished, most experienced, and highest performing land real estate experts in the country, whether we specialize in agricultural land, timberland, ranch or recreational properties, or just vacant land for development. Here's a list of the requirements. So you have to complete 104 hours of required land use education, and that involves some core courses, and you have the opportunity to choose electives that might meet your needs for your region of the country. You have an achievement level in volume of land sales or in providing real estate services related to land. And there's a whole lot of different ways that you can qualify on that volume. You have to complete an ALC final comprehensive exam. After you take all of the courses and pass those courses individually, you have a whole comprehensive exam just to make sure that you really grasp all the things that you've learned in those awesome classes. You also have to submit a formal portfolio to our ALC committee for review. That's going to have your application, all your production levels, all the information on the classes you took, your exams, everything, so that they can get a full picture of you as a land professional before they decide to bestow upon you the ALC designation. So for more information on those requirements, you can visit rliland.com. So the format of this course is really part lecture, part discussion, and part individual and group activities. And your participation is key. Zoom classes are oftentimes not as interactive as in-person meetings, but we want them to be, so feel free to speak up. I want it to be an interactive and an enjoyable learning opportunity for everyone, and I need all of your help to do so. So you have actually got 2 tools during this course. You're going to have a participant guide that will give you all kinds of resources in there. There's copies of the slides, a summary of what we're discussing, and some key learning points. We will reference the reference guide, which is the second part of your tools, and that contains a lot of supplemental information and materials and other forms for use after the course and some other resources you may need. So we'll use the reference guide during the course a couple of times, so make sure you know where those are handy. Action plans. So in Land 101, you're going to learn about SMART goals. We are going to be writing SMART goals during this course using new action plans. So here's a brief review of how to develop your personal action plan. So an action plan lists the details involved in accomplishing your goal. So we're going to cover a great deal of information in this course, and we'll provide you with a lot of ideas and some new goals, or to put towards your new goals. To help you set goals and implement your knowledge and the skills you're learning, I have action plans for each of you. So I'm going to hand out copies of the blank action plan forms. These look like this. So let's talk about how you can use this action plan form. If you want to set your goal for, let's say, increase volume, what types of action steps can you take to do that? What's going to be, what are you going to be responsible for? There's a deadline for everything we do in this business, even if it's something has to be done to trigger another deadline. Identify resources that may be available, whether those are people or websites or just data that you may need. Go ahead and identify and anticipate potential barriers so that you can try to find ways to overcome them in your process. And then you can log your result after everything's done. So who could give me an example of a goal? Come on, Amanda, I know you've got one. In using our example goal, what are some action steps that may support that goal? And in our responsible column, list who's responsible. It might be you or somebody else in achieving that goal. Be sure that you're specific about the deadlines. It should be a day instead of a week or a month. Don't just say it needs to be done in February. Is it the 1st or the 15th? And we'll be realistic about it as well. Are there any questions about this action plan or setting your goals? And we will take some time after each module to allow you to work on your action plans and record any new information you learn that you may want to implement later. So before we get into our first module, let's take a look at our course objectives. Upon completion of this course, you're going to be able to explain the principles of real estate, explain your bundle of rights, define what highest and best use is, determine factors that contribute to property value. You'll be able to explain supply and demand and describe components of a successful sale. You'll be able to explain government and legal factors impacting the property in the sale, and explain economic factors that will impact the property in the sale. You can tell your clients and be able to clearly explain due diligence and what's involved in that process. You can prepare them for, and you can make and negotiate the offer. Describe different forms of financing that may be available to buyers, and be able to explain permits and contingencies and other provisions that may impact the sale. We know that land is not like all real estate. That's why it's a niche, and that's why you're here. So understanding all of these objectives is going to set you at a higher level to be able to deal with buyers, sellers, or investors of real estate. You may not personally buy, sell, or transition land, but your clients will. And the principles that we're going to cover apply anywhere, anytime, for any kind of property, whether it's commercial, residential, office, industrial, recreational farming, commercial farming, ranching, literally any land use. And having an understanding of this type of transitional land is going to help you become the trusted advisor for your buyers, sellers, investors, all of their needs. Are there any questions? All right, so let's go over module 1. We're going to go over the principle of real estate. We're going to discuss basic real estate concepts. And you may be familiar with some of these, but the review is important so that we can make sure everybody has the same foundation when it pertains to transitional land. So in the module, we'll review the principles of real estate. We're going to be able to explain the principles of real estate and the bundle of rights, highest and best use definitions, determine factors that contribute to the property value, and explain supply and demand. Who can tell me what the 7 principles of real estate are? I'll bet you most people can't. All right, so you have anticipation, substitution, the principle of balance, the principle of competition and conformity, the principle of assemblage, one of my favorite parts, and the principle of comparative advantages. So we're going to review detail of each in our reference guide. So if you'll go to page 10 and 11 of your guide, we can review each of these concepts individually in more detail. So the principle of anticipation is the value of a property based on the expectation or the anticipation of future benefits down the line. So it becomes paramount to include all foreseen future benefits and expenses of the property. The principle of substitution is when 2 or more similar properties are available, the one with the lowest price is always going to sell first. So why should an investor purchase this parcel rather than that one? It's either less expensive or offer 1 or more benefits not served by other available sites. The principle change is constant, so probable uses and values of a specific parcel are completely dynamic. Market for real estate is local, though certain recreational industrial properties could be regional or national, but available financing is quasi-nationally based. So subtle changes in local business climates can be detrimental or greatly positive on a prospective development. So what looks good on paper one day might be altered by construction of one project nearby. If it's office or retail, it could greatly affect a residential project that's proposed. The principle of balance. The overall value of a parcel or development is maximized by optimizing the economic mix of 4 factors of production. So you've got land, labor, capital, and management. Classical land economics treats land as residual claimant, that is, all other factors are first paid, with remaining income being capitalized into the land value. Over improvement of a parcel, though, reduces land value. And alternatively, though, a proper mix between property uses and locations enhances the value of everyone's real estate. There has to be a balance in the number of offices and industrial properties and retail sites and housing sites for you to have a good balanced area. The principle of competition, simply stated, that one, profits encourage competition. So if rental rates result in greater return than normal given enough time, the market will construct enough additional space to reduce returns to normal. So the market will always correct itself. and often overbuilds, lowering returns below acceptable standards. So if you build too much, it's going to affect the value of everyone else. If returns look too good to be true, they probably are in the end. It sounds too good to be true, it probably is. We've all heard that. The principle of conformity. Land value is maximized when land uses are compatible and consistent within an area, just like we discussed with competition. At a macro level, land uses have to be compatible. High-rise luxury housing like condos and apartments and co-ops is less valuable if it's located next to an industrial site or an industrial park, but it's more valuable if it's near what? Schools and parks and things for people to do. Alternatively, though, on a micro level, like in a neighborhood, consistency of use and value can enhance long-term values. So the principle of progression states that a smaller or a lower quality property is enhanced by the larger or high quality properties. So if you're a residential broker, you know that you don't want to be the biggest house in the neighborhood, but you don't want to be the second biggest house. The smallest house usually benefits from being in the houses in the neighborhood with the larger homes. So the value of the worst property in an area is strengthened by the surrounding superior homes. But conversely, when the best property in the area is there, it's detrimentally affected by the worst properties. That's the principle of regression. So the other section that you've got there, where is it? Missing my page there. Assemblage. They've actually called it plottage in your reference guide here. So a parcel assembled from several smaller parcels can be more valuable than the combined value of all the smaller tracts. So basically, plottage or assemblage reflects a potentially higher value resulting from the greater number of alternative uses. So if you have a Walmart or a big box development or a grocery store complex or a lifestyle center, they need a large site in an accessible, heavily trafficked location. But there may not be one large parcel that would meet their needs. So then they have to go back and assemble smaller pieces to get the acreage they need. The bigger piece, the larger assembled piece, is worth more because there are more ways that you can use that property than the small ones individually. The last principle is comparative advantage. So this is more of an economic principle for those of you with a CPA or economics background. It explains why attractive land is used for one purpose rather than another. So land may be put into use because of a unique feature that other sites don't possess. Land may have this piece might have fewer limitations than this piece over here on the other side of the street. Hence, a property has a comparative advantage or a least comparative disadvantage over others. One or a combination of several factors may actually turn out into the transition of land use. If they build a school nearby, they're probably going to try to put some homes nearby, like we discussed back in the assemblage section. If they're going to do an industrial use, they're probably going to want to put some office or some retail nearby. To change the use of a property from rural to urban requires comparative advantage. So an example would be a location of an airport over relatively flat, well-drained land. Technology's made almost any location, though, a potential growth site, depending on the site having at least one comparative advantage. Now, comparative advantages can either be subjective or objective. Objectively, natural resource advantages like climate, topography, drainage, beach access, water access, terrain can uniquely segment one property from another. Likewise, the availability of sewer, infrastructure, telephone, internet, electric can make one property better than another property. Availability to highways, transportation, driving times, distance to specific destinations, or the right kind of zoning or deed restrictions can uniquely distinguish one parcel from another. So it's important to know about things like newly planned airports, new roads and highways, toll roads, schools, lifestyle centers, manufacturing districts, historical districts, surrounding land uses, architectural styles, all of those things you need to know about so that you can compare advantages from one parcel to the next. Does anyone have any questions on those? There's more information in your resource guide for those as well. So when we talk about bundle of rights, what are we specifically referring to? It's typically going to be private property rights and government rights. So who can tell me some more specifics about private rights? Most people who are going to talk about those private rights is whether you use or not use the property. You want to be able to give it away. You want to be able to keep and sell it. You want to be able to rent it. These are all things that realtors advocate for on a normal day for homeowners and property owners across the country. But individuals usually hold rights, including these, to give it away, sell it, refuse to sell it. And when a property is leased, the right to pay the rent and use the property is held by the lessee, while the owner, the lessor, maintains the right to receive periodic rental payments and for a return of the right to use the property when the agreement expires. So when a property is mortgaged, the mortgagee or the lender, they customarily reserve the right to obtain ownership of the property if the borrower fails to repay the loan as agreed. In an easement, the right to cross a property may be held by one or more individuals or by public in general. So because the ownership of real estate is in reality ownership of a bundle of rights, it's critical to identify those rights that may be available for sale. The government of the United States retains 4 different types of rights. They have taxation, eminent domain, police power, and escheat. These rights are often shared or vested with local governments or state governments, and the rights may and often do substantially alter legal alternative uses of a parcel. So the government reserves not only the right to tax real estate like ad valorem taxes, but to also tax rules relating to the treatment of income and losses arising from ownership of that property. So tax policy can alter the use of a property as well. Eminent domain is the right of some level of government to take privately owned land for public purposes. Within governmental police powers reside the rights reserved to protect and promote the well-being and health of the public in general. So the government also reserves the right of escheat. Escheat provides for the transfer of land ownership to the government when an individual dies without any heirs or a will. I mean, everyone's heard of an example of all of these different things at some point in time in your real estate career or personally. Land is typically developed for 4 basic uses also. It breaks down to 4. You've got commercial, residential, mixed use, and institutional. These uses apply to both the rural and urban land, but they mostly apply to urban land. First, let's review land for commercial use. Who can share some examples of commercial use property? You've got things like industrial, you've got retail, office, hospitality, all different kinds of things. Commercial land's typically going to be in populated areas used to produce profit. That's going to town. All right, that's your cities. Those are where your jobs are. Commercial use in Orlando, Florida, hotels, restaurants, attractions. New York City, same thing, hotels, restaurants, offices, business space. So how we refer to these may vary, and there are a lot of non-residential other than senior living, but my main issue is industrial is often a hard zoning to get due to neighbor objections, and the land's slow to sell or absorb. It moves a little slower. It makes industrial very unique. Who can give me a definition and some examples of residential land? Residential land includes single-family homes, multifamily structures, condos, townhomes, apartments. Residential is where the jobs go to sleep at night, as we say. It's typically going to be development of urban land that into single or multifamily. Development of urban land varies and can be new homes built on existing rural or agricultural sites, homes built in warehouses or other commercial sites as part of a revitalization project, or new homes and developments being built on existing home sites. Buyers of single-family homes look for things like location, price range, and amenities. Those are the three biggest things they're looking for, and developers should identify their target markets by researching and identifying the buying preferences of those in that area. Realtors have some amazing tools, and I'm sure all of our RLI members do as well. I use Realtors Property Resource to get a lot of buying preferences for to identify sites and locations that might be suitable for a client in my area. A lot of sources of information for those who may not be realtors, though. Local economic development, that is a huge resource for you. The Chamber of Commerce and Building, Zoning, and Planning Commissions and the planning departments. Make friends with all of those people. And you can also get some data from metrostudy.com. Our next type of land is going to be, next type of urban land is mixed use. Who can give me a definition and some examples of mixed use? One of the biggest trends in land use is mixed use development. Mixed-use projects normally combine residential with one of the commercial types to create urban living centers, convenient to business and entertainment areas. Well-planned mixed-use developments include walkable distances to shops and work, and a variety of housing types to meet the needs of a lot of different kinds of people, choices of transportation, and public spaces that foster social interaction naturally. We have one in Wilmington called Mayfair. You've got condos above residential. That's the neighborhood is where the movie theater is. There are grocery stores, tons of restaurants, the shopping, Williams-Sonoma, J.N. Taylor, all of the things are there. It's a really popular neighborhood, and a lot of people who live in there do not have cars. So that's why it's key to have the transportation options. Mixed use projects can come in two varieties. You've got integrated and you've got non-integrated mixed uses. An integrated mixed use is where residential and office and retail are in the same building. They're most common in dense urban settings where land is really expensive and there's a lot of foot traffic and a lot of pedestrians. These projects take great skill on the part of the developer, as it can be really difficult to balance the desire for the peace and quiet of residents with the noise and the garbage and all the other things that come along with commercial uses. A non-integrated mixed use includes more than one land use on a single parcel, but each building has a single use, such as condos or office. So since each building in the project has a single use, phasing and buffering and compatibility can be accommodated to overcome those commercial nuisances that we spoke about a minute ago. So in Boulder, Colorado, One Boulder Place is a great example of mixed use complexes, and it incorporates retail, restaurants, residential condos, office space. They've got underground parking, and everything is organized around a public center plaza. Really nice little community, looks exactly like some of the ones down here in Wilmington and coastal North Carolina. However, being this close to the coast, if you dig a hole that deep, it's probably going to fill up with water, so we can't accommodate underground parking near the beach. Our next type of land development is going to be institutional. Who can give me a definition or some examples of an institutional land use? Exactly. Those are things like things that do not normally seek, the people that don't seek land but are included in planning because they're needed as part of other developments. It's all of the things you need. It's your schools, your hospitals, your fire stations, your public service facilities, things like that. Site criteria for where these go and are going to be located are developed by demographics and then by the projections of growth in a certain area. So the school board's going to take into consideration how many students are going to be in this new residential development and how many patients are going to be expected and when for the hospitals. The site criteria requires infrastructure for access to roads and utilities And those needs have to be centrally located to the population base that they'll serve. So institutional takes a little bit more planning, but they're very strategic about where they're going to be located. So let's talk about entitlements. They are one of the parts of our bundle of rights. Entitled land is generally worth much more than land with no permits or zoning allowed uses that are in demand. Land entitlement is the process of obtaining government approvals for allowing the development of land, often the highest and best use. So land entitlement can take years and cost thousands of dollars to get a neighborhood like One Boulder Place approved. It's not always the case though, and sometimes it's recommended that the broker investigate the cost and time involved to properly advise their buyer or seller on how long it's going to take, what to reasonably expect, and what can be done, what's reasonable to try to accomplish within your due diligence process. As you can imagine, there are all different types of steps that you've got to take. You've got permits, you've got land development regulations that may be in place at the coast, you've got setbacks from areas of environmental concern, wetlands, things like that. Zoning is big. What is it zoned now? What can it be zoned in the future? We'll get into that later. And comprehensive and general plans. If you've got a subdivision or a parcel of land that's had some work done on it, and there's a preliminary subdivision map laid out showing that you can get these many lots on this piece of property by the current zoning and the land development regulations and what's permitted, then that land's going to be worth more than just a regular agricultural piece. Entitlements are key. It also reduces uncertainty for the developer. That's one reason a developer is going to pay more for land that has the right zoning with the density that they need, or maybe already has permits needed to develop the land, especially if it's for road access, water access. And as important permits and zoning are obtained, the value is increased as the utility of the land is enhanced. Are there any questions on entitlements? Okay. So the process, some key terms that you need to know: concurrency. So this is going to be things like roads, utilities, government services in place when they're needed. Exaction is a condition for development imposed on a parcel of land requiring land or funds to gain approval. Mitigation is compensation for an impact to the environment or offset infrastructure. That would be like wetland mitigation is a good example of that. Vesting. So that's a point at which certain approvals can no longer be taken away or modified. The permit's approved, it's done, it can't be rescinded, you're good to go, you've got a year to get it done. Sunsetting. A government approval or permit expires due to lack of use. So once your permit is and your approval is vested, it's going to sunset at a certain point in time. You need to know when that's going to be, and so do your clients. And then you've got non-government organization or third-party organization. Sometimes there will be approvals or entitlements or things that may be on a property that come from or are required by one of these types of organizations. So a plat, that's going to be a plan, a map, or a chart of a piece of land with actual already in place improvements or proposed improvements. An allowable use is a use for land permitted in a specific zoning district. So in my area, if you have an R10 parcel, it is a residential use parcel with a 10,000 square foot lot minimum. That is a specific land, allowable use, and you don't have to go really do anything to split it up if you have a large parcel, as long as it meets those requirements. Compatibility, a land use or activity that coexists with neighboring uses or activities without creating adverse effects. So that's the residential subdivision not next to the industrial site and closer to the park or the school. Or that is the office complex located next to the industrial complex or the retail shopping center. Typical consultants for entitlement work and resources and relationships that you're going to need to get these things accomplished. You need to be friends with your planner and everybody in the zoning and land use department. They can be a huge resource for you and point you in the right direction. Engineers are going to be the ones who provide your technical reports and plans, and you're going to need some engineers. So make sure you have a good relationship with some in the area. A land use attorney, not all realtors are created equal, not all land professionals are created equal, and not all attorneys are created equal. We know this. So you need a good attorney that really understands zoning and legal agreements and easements and development and things on land use specifically. You may be in need of an ecologist or a biologist if you may be dealing with an endangered species or wetland studies or things like that. An architect for building design and site layout and subdivision layout and project layout and renderings and all those things that can be helpful in showing the vision of what your client's intended use for a property may be. So this slide shows some entitlement categories and rough price ranges. Now, these price ranges are probably going to vary because smaller markets tend to cost less and sometimes much less, and larger markets will cost more. So legal and desk work, you may be looking at 10 to 50 grand on a large commercial transitional land tract. Legal and public hearings and all those things, probably $500,000 to $100,000, depending on how involved the project may be and how much you need to do to make it work. In engineering side, it can vary. I mean, in my area, I've seen some engineering on some transitional tracks in the 20 to 40,000 range, but I'm sure it can go up from there. We have no idea what the high end of that could be. Same thing for surveying. I mean, I might be able to get a small lot surveyed for $1,000, but if you want some acreage done, it's going to cost you $5,000 at least. And that depends what kind of survey. There's 14 different kinds in North Carolina. I don't know how many there are in your state, but a boundary survey is a lot cheaper than an as-built survey. Planning, approvals, permitting, processing, drafting, redrafting, time, energy, emotional trauma, $10,000 to $150,000 probably. Your appraisal, commercial appraisals are not cheap. They are very expensive. So you could be looking between $5,000 and $25,000. And again, all these numbers could vary in your market, but you should know about what your range is going to be though. A market study depends on how many people, oh no, hang on, let me go back. Market study depends on how many people you have in your pocket as a tool at the Chamber of Commerce or at Economic Development that may be able to provide you the data you need to where you don't have to go pay the 10 to 35 grand, but you might have to hire a specialist for market studies to make sure that you're in conformity and you're using a, doing a compatible development or intended project that will work for the neighborhood and the area. And then environmental consultants, those are expensive. I think if I had to go back in time, I would probably go back to college and become an environmental engineer. $5,000 to $150,000 to get them to step out of their vehicle on site. You're not going to pay less than $5,000 for an environmental consultant to be on site in my area. How much is it in your areas? I'd be interested to know. This slide is going to show you some typical government fee categories and some rough price ranges for that. Again, smaller markets tend to cost less, sometimes much less. Larger markets are going to cost more. Rezoning, at least $5,000. I mean, you're going to drop $5,000 for all these things. Rezoning, site plan review fees, engineering review fees, because you got people that are going to charge you to look at this work that's already been done by people above their pay grade. I love the government. And then construction inspection fees, 1% to 3% of the value of the property or the price. Permitting fees, you've got impact fees and connection fees for utilities and infrastructure. Those are expensive. I mean, you're paying $5,000 just for a water tap in my area. And then bonding fees. You may have bonds required by the state, by transportation, by the city, municipality, county, plan for 1% to 5%. In total. I mean, as you can see, it adds up to be in the transitional land or development business. And that's why we want to be sure that we are handling all of these transactions as professionally and thoroughly as we can, and why people need to be using land consultants when they're doing land real estate. Does anybody have any questions on any of these? All right. This slide shows some construction and development categories. Purpose of this list is really just to help you keep in mind that there's a lot of development costs that sellers and real estate professionals overlook when considering the value of a property. If you have a wooded site, it costs a lot of money to get it cleared and to get the land prepped for actual development. And timber is not always worth what you think it might be, but we have a fantastic timber course within RLI that you can take to learn a little bit more about if the trees are really going to get you value. You got cost to excavate and fill. Underground water and sewer is very costly to run. Public utilities, I don't know, in my area, they're not really requiring you to run phone lines anymore, but they really want fiber optic and high-speed internet. Paving, parking, curbing, walkways, buffers and landscaping requirements, especially depending on the use of an adjacent parcel. You may be required to have a heavier buffer if you've got something going on next door and you're doing something that's going to disrupt them. Off-site issues like turn lanes and transportation improvements, drainage systems, stormwater retention, that stuff can really get expensive in my area as well. Are there any other site construction things that maybe aren't on the list that we could add that we haven't thought of? All right. So consultants alone are not enough. As you gain experience, you may develop a sixth sense or some instincts or some intel. Like, I can kind of walk a piece of property and get a feel for whether it drains right or whether it might or might not be okay for septics. Listen to your gut. Don't listen to a consultant tell you or your client that there's no problem when you know or your instincts are telling you otherwise. An NGO, a non-government organization that's against a development, can make it very difficult to convince a developer to enter the market. If they don't work for the government and you're hiring a private consultant that is not okay with what you're doing, they can really make it difficult. You want to be able to research the community so that you have an understanding of what's going on. Go ahead and meet early with stakeholders, build goodwill, let them know that you're trying to improve the whole neighborhood and the whole area around it, and you want to bring something good that everyone can be proud of. You need to learn about those local and active NGOs and TPOs that we talked about earlier, and you need to know what's the local government attitude toward new development. You also need to be able to anticipate the cost and time to secure those entitlements and the permits and the approvals so that you can set up your contracts for success with realistic expectations for all parties involved, with a little bit of buffer time in between because stuff happens. I will say about local government attitude, I found that it's helpful when you're learning who the players are in your planning and zoning and land use departments. It's helpful to just go in there and, without a project in mind, just go in and ask them, hey, what are y'all looking for? What are you looking for in the community? What do we need? If you can fill a need that they have in your plans, you can, tit for tat a little bit. Maybe they need a soccer field for a school and you have a drain area that can't be used for homes or your plans. Maybe they need a little bit of land for a park in the area that you're in. Like, sometimes there's a lot of trade-offs. Maybe they'll tell you they need more retail in this area. Maybe they'll tell you they really need a stoplight there. Figure out what their attitude is and where they want to see things, and you will find that it's easier to work with them and they see that you're trying to be helpful and not just trying to find loopholes. Some of the most challenging permits or entitlements to obtain are environmentally related, especially for those of us down near the coast or the beach or water anywhere. In the 90s, wetlands and endangered species really needed to be saved. And in the 2000s, water quality and upland preservation became hot issues. Land is considered wet for significant periods of land that's considered wet for significant periods of time could be termed jurisdictional by the Army Corps of Engineers and certain state agencies. Jurisdictional means that a government agency has the ability to reduce the use or development of the land. So if a jurisdictional determination finds wetlands on your property, a developer would have to show how the proposed plan avoids and minimizes impact to the wetlands. Endangered species present different challenges too. It's best to consult with ecologists if wetlands or endangered species are suspected in or near the subject property. I have had situations where an endangered woodpecker limited development within a 2-mile radius of the tree in which it nested. We also have a very popular, gorgeous piece of bluff property on the Intercoastal Waterway here locally that's called Eagle's Watch, because when the developers started looking at that site, they found a bald eagle nest in a tree. And of course, all development and everything halted until that eagle abandoned the tree for a certain period of time. So what they did is they got creative, and they actually posted a webcam in the tree shining on the nest, and then they, put it online, and they went ahead and pre-sold lots in this neighborhood, subject to a plat to be, recorded and all the things. But it was kind of cool. They turned that limitation into a marketing strategy, and it took about 2.5, 3 years before they were able to continue. But it was really neat because everybody watched the little eagle nest, and we got to see the new babies being born and all the things and watch them grow up. So, they can present a challenge, but you can always turn that frown upside down. The Corps of Engineers can really tie up things, and you have to remember that it's the Army Corps of Engineers, and they work on all kinds of projects like dredging of inlets and waterways. They're required to look at all kinds of things, and that can be a very long process. It would take probably 5 months to get a representative from the Corps on a site here in my area. I don't know how long it would take in your area, but that's something you should definitely know so that you have a time frame. Wetlands come in a variety of types and qualities. Higher quality wetlands is determined by the Corps of Engineers because they're the be-all end-all. That's going to take longer to obtain the permits. It says in here that the permits can even take 5 to 10 years or never even be issued. So if that's a requirement, you need to make sure that you set everybody up for realistic expectations. An Army Corps of Engineers permit is known as a dredge and fill permit. And these permits are typically only valid for 2 or 3 years, so it's imperative they're acted on soon after the permit's issued. You need to get the permit, and you need to start doing your work. The Corps will also, allow other federal agency to comment about proposed project before the permit's issued. So if another agency like Fish and Wildlife objects to something going on or issues a letter stating the project may have a negative impact on a species of bird that nests there or something, then the permit could actually be denied. So the Corps is going to kick it out to everybody else after they look at it and say, hey, y'all good? You good? You good? You good? You good? Okay, cool. What are all your comments? And then they'll come back to you and be like, no, but here's why. And then you can't really do much about it. It can really throw a wrench in your plans. It used to be that a developer just informed a community that they were going to build a project. Like, hey, so-and-so, we're going to do these houses. But today the public is much better informed, and they feel like they have a say in what is being built and where it's going to be placed. These are those people that show up at all of the community planning meetings and rezoning hearings. But as a local broker, it's your job to make sure that you advise your client or the prospective purchaser of hot button issues in the community and their attitude toward development. You may have people who are very opposed to a luxury RV park. It's probably nicer than most of the manufactured home parks, but they're going to be very opposed to an RV park, or they're going to be really opposed to this industrial building. You're always going to have people who are passionate about certain things, and you really need to know what hot button issues have already been pressed and what the reaction was, and maybe you can use that to your advantage in your plans. So let's look at a case study. This property was in a less than prime area. not the best ideal location or anything, but this was back in the 90s. By 2003, it was identified as a potential for transitional land. With 110,000 mostly vacant single-family lots 3 miles from that site, it was determined a large community shopping center was the highest and best use. So they had over 100,000 vacant home sites, just lots, within 3 miles of this project. And they're like, hey, what do they need? Shopping. People need to go shopping. So they marketed this property as transitional properties, as a transitional property. And you can see the vacant lots to the east over here in the aerial photo, right all up in here in this bottom right picture. And you can also see it in the future land use map. But one of the challenges with all property, but especially transitional lands, is prior uses. So this property was marketed as a potential residential project. And the fact is that the property was used as a neighborhood dump for decades and covered up about 30 years ago. So there was only a thin strip of land along the roadway that was actually buildable due to the buried trash under most of the property and most of the whole site. Let that sink in. We've got one of those areas in my hometown here in Wilmington too. So, you kind of need to know the background. And look at some old historical data so that you can figure out what things used to be and where they come from, because history has a tendency to repeat itself or come back and bite you in the butt with your plans. So let's talk about zoning. Zoning is used by governments to allocate land for specific uses, promote compatibility between adjacent parcels, and control density and intensity that can be placed on a site. Transitional lands are most likely going to require a change of zoning to maximize that land's potential. If you have something zoned rural agricultural, and it really is the most flexible zoning because it's just been timberland or soybean field or whatever for forever, you're going to want to change the zoning on that probably to get a higher density. In my area, you can only fit like 3/4 of a unit per acre. I mean, you got to have a 30,000 square foot lot in order to make anything work in that rural agricultural district. But if you can get it rezoned to R15, well, now you're getting close to 3 units per acre. If you can get a rezoned commercial, now you've got a whole other level of opportunity for highest and best use. So you may want to look at what type of zoning something could be. So you need to be able to find your future land use maps, or your comp land use plans, or whatever future maps the county or the planning department has, so that you can make sure that what your intended uses are, or what you're marketing the property as, can actually be done on this parcel based on what the county has identified they want in that area. So here's a future land use map of Frisco, Texas. So you'll notice that there's different colors on the map, and the map key's over here on the right-hand side. The designations on the map will control future rezones. So there are commercial areas and residential areas on the map. You can see the purple right here are urban centers. So they're looking at, this is what they want, where they want an urban center. It looks like a road runs right through the middle of it. They need an urban center in the north, and they need one over here near all of this other suburban regional activity center. All of this yellow is suburban neighborhood houses. So you can see how they kind of place those in their own areas so that you don't have 3 grocery stores right on top of each other. And every neighborhood kind of has their own use. But if you want to try to do a residential neighborhood in this little block right here, you need to be able to know that, and you need to have these future maps readily available for your counties or your cities or your areas. And remember, the county is going to overlay, or your city is going to overlay your county. So if you've got municipalities in your area, make sure that you have each municipality's future land use maps available as a reference and a resource for you as well. The key takeaway here is what areas are presently zoned for lower demand categories. What areas are presently zoned for lower demand categories but have a future land use and higher demand? So it might not be so great now, but the county recognizes that, or whoever recognizes that. So they want to revitalize that area, or they're interested in changing it up to make it this, and it's going to be worth way more money. This map is another one for Frisco, Texas. It does not have a key, but there's some observations you can make just from color coding, right? The red areas are going to be commercial, everything along your highways and your byways and all your transportation corridors. And then the yellow areas are typically going to be residential. And then green areas are parks, preserves, game lands, forest, national parks, things like that, preserve areas, conservation areas. So, what it is now isn't necessarily what it's always going to be. And especially when you can see proposed roads and water and things like that, you can definitely bet that there's going to be some changes in those areas, because everybody wants to live near the water and nobody wants to drive a long distance to work. Here's a future land use map of Rock Around, Texas. So you can notice the different colors on the map and the map key on the right side. The designations on this map will control future rezones. Again, note the commercial and residential areas on the map. So again, your commercial's red, your residential's yellow, open space is green, public facilities, hospitals, schools, all those things are in blue. Future land use is important. You got to know what it can be, what it was, what it is, and what it could be in the future. This zoning map from Rock Around lacks a key, but we can make similar observations about the color coding like we did with Frisco and before. Red's commercial, yellow's residential, green's preserve. Do you see any land presently zoned for agricultural or residential but has a future land use like commercial or industrial? There are all types of properties through here that could end up being commercial, especially the ones right through here on that main road headed down at toward like 7-8 o'clock from the main highway here. You've got a lot of area over here that looks like it's ag that surrounds a road that could probably be rezoned. I think there's a lot of opportunity for this. I think it would be cool to see a more updated map to see what they've currently done and the changes that they've made. So let's look at Frisco. Here's the two maps side by side from the Frisco, Texas, so you can easily identify it a little more. So look at these that are residential over here on the left that have, or over here on the right, that have a future change on the left there. So this whole purple area that they want to be a public community center right now is zoned something completely different. They've got all of the green right now on the top part of the Frisco map. That's all preserve open space. But over here on the future land use, it looks like they really want to bust that into like office, industrial, jobs, things like that, with another community center up at the top. It's helpful to know these things because then you can increase your the value. You can, for the clients, you can increase your profits and you can increase your knowledge, which helps you do more deals. Here's that comparison on Round Rock. So the right is what it is now and the left is what they want it to be. So you can see that they're wanting to get away from these huge, ginormous chunks of commercial and maybe start integrating some mixed use and some public areas and some more parks and some more green space into town. Everybody wants more parks and green space. And if you'll take the energy class through RLI, you will learn about all of the values of the energy assets for some of these parcels as well. So let's talk about value. Value is the ability of a good or a commodity to command others in exchange, and serves as the primary criteria in real estate decisions. It's all about the value. The value is not necessarily intrinsic to real estate. It consists of the sum of all of the rights arising from the ownership of the property. All of these rights we've already talked about. The components of value, the types, other factors for consideration. The four forces interacting to create value are scarcity, utility, demand, and effective purchasing power. This collection translates ultimately to relative worth. All of these are required for there to be a value, for any kind of value to exist. For real estate to have value, it must be scarce. The power of real estate to satisfy a need or want is called utility, but utility itself doesn't imply value. Air, for example, has great utility to all humans, but there's no scarcity. Utility can determine whether a site should be considered for potential development. So imagine a tract of land on a ridge overlooking the ocean. Because of the ocean view, it possesses a utility that a site on the other side of the ridge without the ocean view doesn't have. The desire of individuals to want things translates to demand. They want that ocean view, trust me. A housing site overlooking a river with good access to a major metropolitan area would have demand. But there are thousands of miles of riverview sites with little demand in remote mountain or jungle locations. The actual ability for individuals or groups to buy is expressed as effective purchasing power. So snow ski chalets are scarce, are in demand, and provide utility to owners. However, not everybody can afford them. So thus, unless a real estate development of any type is affordable to the targeted market, it's not going to be successful. Value has numerous meanings. A parcel of real estate may have the same or differing salvage value, insurance value, book value, assessed value. Yeah, we know there's a difference there. Loan value or market value. Each of these has their own unique use. However, market value is the one that's most associated and often referred to when discussing land for sale. Regardless of value type, value is generally associated with utility. So that is, what can we do with the land to make money? Rising construction costs can reduce the value of land if the end user is not willing to pay more for the product in terms of purchase price or rent. Factors for consideration. All of these things. What can you do with it? What's the completed value, cash flow, taking into account all of your construction costs and development costs, your minimum profit threshold, because if my money can make more money sitting in the bank or somewhere else, I'm probably not going to be in the development business. Changes in land use or density can increase or decrease the land utility and hence in turn value. But rising development and construction costs can erode land value over time, which I think is what I've experienced in some areas of my market. Maybe you have too. So let's use a commercial example. So our contractor quoted a construction price of $165 per square foot of building. But our broker informs us that they can sell commercial buildings for 200 per square foot. The developer's target profit is $450 for the deal. So here's your facts. Listing prices are $218,000 an acre, or $5 a square foot. The allowable building area is 40% of the partial, or 17,424 square feet per acre. What is the residual land value? I'll give you a minute. Okay, regardless of the asking price, how much is the land worth to the buyer based on the minimum profit requirement? By taking the final sales price and subtracting the profit and development costs, we arrive at the residual land value. So in our example, we find the land's only worth $159,840 to the developer. This is the only way to make the land more valuable to that developer is to find a way to either put more building space on the parcel or reduce construction cost. It's only two ways that it'll be worth more money to them. It's kind of like net profit. You got to back your numbers back into it. And, you know, especially with commercial, it's all about the numbers and everything has to work out right or it's never going to fly. Let's look at a rural subdivision example though, something a little different than what we discussed a second ago with commercial. So we've got a 150-acre tract available for purchase in a rural community. Resale of the existing homes on 10-acre lots are selling for $300,000 to $500,000. So a $300,000 comparable. Those are going to be your older, smaller homes in the 1,500 square foot range. And we estimate the value of these homes, the structure only at about 150. Therefore, the lot value is estimated to be about 150 or 15,000 per acre. The $500,000 comparable sales are newer, but they're not brand new construction. Those are in the 2,500 square foot range, so they're bigger. So you estimate the value of these homes, the structure only, at $300,000. So the lot value is estimated to be $200,000 or 20 per acre. Here's facts. Rural subdivision roads, you might as well average them in at $25,000 per home built to state specs. New home construction is going to cost $300,000 to build that house. Estimated price we're going to sell it for, $550,000. So the land value from our comparable sales range from 15 to 20 per acre. So we're kind of on the high end of that. The buyer wants to double their investment. What do you think? Doable? So if you take out your $25,000 cost for the road, take out the price of the house, you're left with $175,000, not $200,000. Everybody forgets the road and the infrastructure costs. $87,500 per acre is what that ends up at. Did it work? Maybe. All right, townhouses. Multifamily is a little different too. This is an actual project in Nashville, okay? So the list price for this parcel was $2 million. The buyer offered 1.4 and was rejected, but the final price was 1.5. Seller received the highest value for their land, though lower than the seller's expectations. Here's the thing, the property was listed suitable for 5 townhouses. They did all their comps, they did all their numbers. Most developers' target profit is going to be 15% or more. If they're going to do it for 10, they can put their money in other investments and not have to go through the headache of developing and doing all of these things. So if you figure out how much you can pay for the land, you know, your residual land value after your minimum profit that you got to have to make it worth the time that you're putting into it, plus the building cost gets you right under $1.5 million. So they didn't get as much as they wanted. They got the highest value, but it's all in how you do your numbers. So market value is the most probable price as of a specific specified date in cash or terms equivalent to cash, or in other precisely revealed terms for which the specified property right should sell after reasonable exposure in a competitive market under all conditions requisite to a fair sale, the buyer and seller each acting prudently and knowledgeably, and that neither is under duress. That is the actual definition of market value. And neither an appraiser or an attorney wrote that, because that's way too many words. Just my opinion. All right, the value of land, depending on the quantity and quality of data available, may be estimated using one of several techniques. Each of these techniques depends on one or more of the 3 approaches to value. The 4 approaches are the market or sales comparison, cost, and income. Each is designed to glean data from buyers, sellers, and users of real estate and arrive at an estimate of the market value of the subject property. Depending on the data available, each approach has its strengths and weaknesses. In the case of transitional land, estimating market value is really a 2-step process. First, determine the highest and best use, future use, all of the other things. Market analysis for probable use of a parcel should concentrate on highest and best use. After you determine highest and best use, you determine your value. As is true with the residential market, the value of land is usually determined through an appraisal. What do you think are some of the differences in land appraisals versus appraisals of residential property? Because not all appraisers are created equal. There may not be a structure on the property, might be used differently, might not be occupied. Maybe there aren't any comps in the area. Absolutely. Although a market comparison is one approach to appraising land, there are two others that may be used just as well for the same reasons we discussed. A land appraisal can be performed using one of the three approaches: market comparison, cost approach, or income approach. A market comparison is most common. It's typically what everybody does. And actually, in fact, every appraisal starts at market comparison, trying to find something similar to your subject property. But we usually deal with unicorns in the land business. So in an ideal world, a combination of all of these should give you the most accurate value. There are advantages and disadvantages to the market approach. An advantage is that it's a well-known approach, as well as the following. It incorporates previous market participant actions. It's easily explained to non-real estate professionals, and active market provides recent sales to use as a comparison. There are disadvantages too. Disadvantages include the fact the quantity and quality of sales data may not be high, and that's why it's important to verify any comparable sales with the buyer and seller or their brokers whenever possible. The market approach also relies on historical transactions, and it does not look to the future, which could provide outdated information. And as fast as the markets can move sometimes, especially over the past couple of years, you want to make sure that you're using more recent comparable sales or the most recent data that you possibly can find. There are some, in the cost approach, you've got advantages and disadvantages. On the plus side, it's useful in evaluating new, especially new construction, relatively new properties. It's used when income data is unknown or not relevant. So, we don't know how much it's going to rent for because we haven't built it yet and rented one. Disadvantages, though, it can be difficult to estimate depreciation on the materials when they do the cost approach. And then for new buildings, a value indicator may be more accurate than for marked economic shifts. So, the price of lumber goes up super crazy. They can look at value indicators rather than today's actual cost of a 2x4. Does that make sense? Other appraisal methods estimates value by converting a string of expected future payments to a present property value, including cash flows and reversion at the time of the sale in the future. That's all your income approach. So how much money am I going to make off this string of rental payments to present property value? What's the cash flow looking like? And then how much is it going to be worth to me when it comes back to me later? Common ways to analyze your income: cap rate, internal rate of return, gross rent multiplier, FMRRs. You've got a couple of different ways to look at the income approach depending on what's most applicable to your particular site or your particular situation. So residential land value technique. This is a conservative approach to land valuation. You'll rarely get hurt if you don't pay more than the residential land value. It's mostly used for feasibility analysis, highest and best use. This technique assumes a final value or sale price to a hypothetical project, and then subtracts the building and development cost to arrive at the residual land value. So they assume what this whole sale price of this project that they're thinking about doing may be. They're going to back out all the building and development costs and then figure out what that land value is, like we did in the examples earlier. Risk is all about perception. Without risk, there's no reward. To me, the risk of falling is real. Gravity's not nice. But to this worker, the risk is very low. So it's all about perception to the buyer. What might work for this person might not work for that one. And this guy might be scared of something this chick's not scared of. So, always make sure that you understand what your buyer is, or what your client's goals are and what their comfortability with risk is. Risk doesn't have to be real to impact the purchase or sale price. It can actually just be perceived. let's see, when real estate is used so that it results in the highest land value possible, it's deemed to be at its highest and best use. So property is basically worthless unless some kind of use exists for it. Like you have to be able to use it or it's not worth anything. It's kind of like that, jacket you don't ever wear in the back of the closet. You don't really care about it and it's not worth nothing because you never use it. Highest and best use must be a reasonably probable legal alternative that's both physically and financially feasible. So, for example, a parcel located on or near a geological fault line would not physically support a mixed recreation development with a lake as a center point. That's a recipe for disaster. The chance of a zoning change from residential to heavy industrial in an upscale development would be super low. Nor would a property be financed if the best probable return was a loss. Identifying the highest and best use is preeminent in achieving maximum land value. Often, some interim use of land is appropriate if some holding period is necessary. Financial considerations, though, extend far beyond just estimating the value of a property. The implication on probable investors' returns and credit limits need consideration too. They can't overextend themselves. The following concepts and terms are an introduction to these concepts. Our RLI land investment analysis course really goes into detail to explain these concepts, and it teaches students how to apply the tools and measures to real life real estate investments. That was a mind-blowing course. You get all kinds of spreadsheets. You don't have to build them. You just fill in the blanks. You get all kinds of resources and tools to be able to calculate future value of crops or timber or, development cost and what the last lot's going to sell for. Really cool class. Definitely sign up for that if you haven't taken it yet. When analyzing existing or future income properties, the net operating income is a key figure. The net operating income is all of the gross income received by the owner less the cost of maintaining and managing the investment. So your NOI can then be used with a cap rate or the PV function in Excel to arrive at an estimated market value. Land use capacity consists of two parts. First and foremost is resource quality. Resource quality is the ability of the land to produce products or satisfaction. Land must have the physical capacity to meet the requirements of the proposed use. Second, the site has to have accessibility. Accessibility is a blend of access, distance, time, and mode, such as boat, plane, train, automobile, four-wheel drive vehicle, whatever, and the cost. To have value, the property has to have access, and it requires access from users. If you can't get to it, if it's landlocked, if it's not accessible, it's probably not super valuable. If you need a huge lifted four-wheel drive truck to get to it, most of us would probably enjoy that property, but it's not going to be for everyone because everyone can't get to it and use it. Some mix of air, highway, rail, or water transportation are imperative for development. Often the mistake of relying strictly on the inventory of the types of properties, square feet, number of apartments, or density per acre, that's made. While these are important, resource quality and accessibility must also be considered. Rent theory. This is based on the idea that the more profit a location will generate, the greater the land value under that property. So this theory is a simple and durable economic view of why land values vary from one location to another. So basic economic considerations include current and projected economic base, general demographics, infrastructure, and competing properties. So the level of total economic activity in the area does not necessarily have to be robust to justify new development. Regardless of the state of housing markets, for example, there always exists some demand for conveniently located new residential construction. Always going to be a need there. Nor does the evidence of successful home sales necessarily indicate the economic justification of an additional subdivision selling homes. Current or realistic near-term market rent levels must justify land price. Rental rates for retail space are merely like a function of the sales volume that can be produced from a given location. So sales volume in turn is dependent upon the purchasing power of the surrounding population and alternative retail competition. So land values have to fall in line behind tenable market rents and construction costs. There exists at some point in a local real estate market at which demand for real estate results in a reasonable rate of return to real estate investors or affordable housing for homeowners. The point at which supply and demand intersect is known as the equilibrium. As supply of any type of real estate increases or as demand declines, price and rental rates weaken and drop. If supply is static and relatively slow to change because of long property lives and time requirements to complete construction of new structures. So there's a static supply of properties. Demand, though, is a mix of population, income, credit, and expectations of future costs. Demand can be influenced by information, such as advertising or education. Demand for retail space is predominantly based on change in population numbers and income levels. For housing, however, a zero change in population combined with rising income levels or an aging population with different housing requirements may fuel considerable move up or move down purchasing. That affects your local market. Rising interest rates create the paradox of larger housing costs and at the same time, a flurry of renters purchasing properties before rates increase yet even more. Demand is a complicated factor to estimate. Demand is generally determined through observation of a specific market. As rents increase and vacancies fall, it can be inferred that there's more demand than supply. Conversely, the overall health of the market for properties is evident through current lease terms and vacancy rates. If rents are flat or falling and vacancy is on the rise, there's slack demand for new product. So you might not want to do that housing development. Once we've determined there's new demand in the market, a careful analysis really needs to be done before we can act on that demand. So we need to know how much competing land is there in the market? How many similar projects are in the late planning stages at this time? How does the local supply compare to the larger market supply? Answers to these key questions are important to understanding the demand for a specific parcel. Office and retail demand varies based on population density and existing supply in the market. You need to review local, regional, and state ratio of these uses so that you know kind of where it falls and if there's a need. Common ratios are 2 to 3 retail and 1 to 3 on office. Local demand exclude large single-use commercials, but local demand rarely exceeds 80 square foot per resident. So for example, a suburb of 100,000 residents demands 8 million square feet of commercial uses with 2.67 million square feet of office and 5.3 million square feet of retail. Industrial land demand varies based on the total local supply, access to interstates because they got to get their goods places, and local government attitude toward job creation and balancing the tax base. Industrial land uses are policy decisions. They're generally used to balance or supplement the local tax base. Look for 25, 30 square foot per resident. So a suburb of 100,000 residents can generally support 2.5 to 3 million square feet of industrial uses. Location, location, location. I think that we have all heard that, especially if you are in the residential game like I kind of am. The primary determinant of the use and resultant value of real estate is all about location, folks. A typical tract with probable transitional status can be located anywhere. Yet, no two properties are exactly alike because each occupies a unique point on Earth. So what must be considered are those location factors that combine to make one tract more desirable than others. Urban land development patterns are molded by transportation access, topography, perceptual identification by users. This should go there. Topography encompasses physical differences, including rivers, streams, hills, mountains, geographical faults, fertility of the soil, structural capacity, or drainage. Topography limits to some extent utility availability and transportation access. It's a lot cheaper to build a road than it is a bridge. Perceptual delineation depends not only on physical features of the earth, but also architectural styles, neighborhoods, school districts, and taxing authorities. Turn to Module 1 Knowledge Check page in your participant guide and answer the knowledge check questions. And after you answer the questions, we'll review those as a group. Let's see how much you've retained from this section. All right, so 4 factors required for value to exist are scarcity, utility, demand, and effective purchasing power, correct? The idea that the more profit a location will generate, the greater land value under that property is known as rent theory. Fill in the term for each definition below. Number 3, these include taxation, eminent domain, police power, and a sheet. Government rights, correct. A map or chart of a piece of land with actual or proposed improvements is a plat. Total income and rents minus all costs to the owner. Remember? Net operating income. The process of gaining approval for the rights to develop property for specific use. What was that one? All the entitlements. Yes, you want to be entitled to do these things. Not entitlements like our teenagers. Combines retail, dining, entertainment complex, residential, commercial, and office space in a planned area. That one's so easy. We're mixing up all the uses to put them in one spot. And then these include scarcity, utility, demand, and purchasing power. It was on the last slide. It was one of your first questions. Value components. This approach relies on a summation of both land and improvements. Land value is estimated using value. Land value is estimated using value by estimating the cost of new construction minus depreciation. I need to fix that typo. That's some weird grammar in my slide there. That one's your cost approach. And then which approach estimates value by converting the string of expected future payments to a present value? Income. How much income is it going to generate? This approach estimates the value of the subject property based on the sale of similar ones. This is the one we're all used to. Market comparison. Correct. Good job. All right, let's see here. And that covers Module 1. So in our recap, we discussed the principles of real estate, the bundle of rights, value and all of its components, and highest and best use. I think one of the biggest concepts of this whole module is highest and best use. Are there any questions? All right, so let's go back to your action plan and take a few minutes to, before we go on to the next module, write down any ideas that you had or any plans that you may want to do that will create actions that will help you achieve your goal. There's a lot of great things in there that even every time we go through this, I pick up something that I really should be checking into. I think there's a new future land use map for my county. I should request that. It's December. All right, well then we will move to Module 2.